The English Civil War, 1642-1651, was a conflict that tore the nation apart and reshaped its political landscape. Understanding its causes requires delving into a complex web of political, religious, economic, and social factors that culminated in this dramatic and transformative struggle. At the heart of the political conflict was King Charles III's unwavering belief in the divine right of kings. He believed that his authority to rule was granted by God and was therefore absolute. This view clashed with the growing sentiment in Parliament that the monarchy should be subject to the rule of law and accountable to the people. Charles's financial policies exacerbated tensions. His need for funds led him to impose taxes without Parliament's consent. The most controversial of these was ship money, traditionally levied in coastal areas for naval defense, but extended inland by Charles. This move was seen as an overreach of royal authority and was met with widespread resistance. In 1629, frustrated with Parliament's refusal to grant him the funds he needed, Charles dissolved Parliament and began his personal rule, governing without it for 11 years. During this period, known as the 11 Years' Tyranny, Charles resorted to unpopular measures to raise money, including forced loans and the revival of outdated feudal dues. Religious tensions were another major cause of the Civil War. Charles's marriage to the Catholic Henrietta Maria of France and his support for Archbishop William Laud's reforms raised fears of a return to Catholicism. Laud's changes, aimed at enforcing uniformity and enhancing the power of the clergy, were seen by Puritans and other Protestants as a drift towards Catholic practices. In 1637, Charles attempted to impose the Anglican Book of Common Prayer on Scotland, a predominantly Presbyterian nation. This move sparked widespread rebellion, known as the Bishops' Wars, 1639 to 1640. The Scots formed a national covenant to resist these changes, and their successful defiance forced Charles to recall Parliament to raise funds for the war effort. In April 1640, Charles convened the Short Parliament, hoping to secure funds for his campaign against the Scots. However, Parliament's members were more interested in addressing their grievances against the king's policies than in granting him money. Frustrated by their refusal, Charles dissolved Parliament after just 3 weeks. Desperate for money and facing continued rebellion in Scotland, Charles was forced to call the Long Parliament in November 1640. This Parliament took bold steps to curb the king's power, passing measures to ensure that it could not be dissolved without its consent, and that it would meet at least once every 3 years. It also moved to address past abuses, including the execution of Charles's chief minister, Thomas Wentworth, Earl of Strafford, and the impeachment of Archbishop Laud. In 1641, Parliament issued the Grand Remonstrance, a document listing over 200 grievances against Charles's rule and demanding further reforms. This document highlighted the deep-seated distrust and dissatisfaction with the king's governance. The Remonstrance's publication polarized opinion and increased tensions between supporters of the king and those of Parliament. The economic strain of Charles's policies and the costs of his wars placed significant burdens on the populace. His imposition of fines for the encroachment of royal forests and the revival of obsolete feudal levies, like knighthood fines, were deeply unpopular. These financial burdens, coupled with the resentment over arbitrary taxation, fueled widespread discontent. The growing influence of the merchant and gentry classes also played a role. These groups, increasingly powerful economically and politically, chafed under royal policies that hindered their interests. They saw Parliament as a means to protect their rights and limit the king's arbitrary use of power. The early 17th century saw a rise in political consciousness among the English population. Ideas about governance, the rights of individuals, and the role of Parliament were increasingly debated. Pamphlets, sermons, and public discussions helped spread these ideas, contributing to a climate of questioning and resistance to traditional authority. Social and regional divisions also contributed to the conflict. The north and west of England, more rural and conservative, tended to support the king, while the south and east, more urban and economically dynamic, leaned towards Parliament. These divisions were not absolute, but reflected underlying differences in economic interests and social attitudes. Charles's actions in 1642 further inflamed the situation. His attempt to arrest 5 leading members of Parliament in January was a critical misstep, demonstrating his willingness to use force against his own legislature. This action united many in Parliament against him and increased fears of royal tyranny. By the summer of 1642, both sides were preparing for conflict. On August 22, 1642, Charles raised his royal standard in Nottingham, effectively declaring war on Parliament. The nation was now officially divided into royalist, Cavalier, and parliamentarian Roundhead factions, setting the stage for the brutal and protracted conflict that would follow. The causes of the English Civil War were multifaceted, involving political power struggles, religious conflicts, economic pressures, and social changes. Charles I's unwavering belief in his divine right to rule, combined with his financial and religious policies, brought him into direct conflict with a Parliament increasingly assertive of its rights and powers. The war that ensued reshaped England's political landscape, ultimately leading to the temporary overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. The conflict underscored the enduring struggle between authority and liberty, a theme that resonates through British history and beyond. The English Civil War remains a powerful reminder of the complexities and consequences of governance and the unyielding human desire for justice and representation.